Hello.
Hello, I'm Evelyn.
And I'm Lara.
And this is the Once Upon a Naija podcast.
Welcome. So, our last episode, we ended with a bit of a
cliffhanger, teaser as to what we were going to be speaking about today.
That's right. So, the man who we didn't name, did we even say if it was a man or not? But anyway, it doesn't matter. It's a man now. So, story. Once upon a time.
Time.
That's how you get the juicy story out when you were younger. But yeah, so we're talking about this man who, the word that comes to my mind again is enigma, Iron Man, dictator. I think it's becoming a bit clearer for some people who we might be talking about.
Yeah.
What do you think when you...
Well, when I think of this man, I think of some very wild things.
Yeah.
I'm not a wild person,
Hey,
please.
tell me about it.
I'm not a wild person. But the stories that I was hearing about this guy, it really made me turn my head. So associated with this man and his death is sex workers.
Yeah.
They may have been Indian. Apparently there was an apple. Maybe several. Poison. And I just thought, what sort of...
This makes like a really good murder, crime, crime story. Like...
Who is this? Who is this man? And how did this wild story...
And why is it even important? Like, why is it important for our history podcast? So, should we have a moment of revelation? Drum roll.
General Sani Abacha.
Abacha. So that was a song that's part of the song that was sung when he died. Unfortunately, yes. We'll get to that a bit later on. But yeah, so General Sani Abacha, he died in June 1998. 8th of June 1998, I believe it was.
Yes, you are correct.
Yes. And surrounding his death, as we've alluded to, are quite a few conspiracy theories. So the official report is that he died of a heart attack.
Yes.
Right? But then...
We're not actually certain.
Because you know what? There wasn't actually an autopsy because he was a Muslim. So according to the Islamic rites, it was buried the same day. So how did they conclude that it was a heart attack?
I do not know.
That's part of the many mysteries of Nigeria because, we currently have a president who has so many ailments. He's always abroad for medical treatment and we don't even know what's up with him.
Even that one, even the current one, people come up with their own...
Yeah, I mean, is it even Buhari, Is Buhari really your president?
Yeah, so we have this figure, Abacha, who who has died in somewhat mysterious circumstances, and we think what sort of man generates this kind of mystery and why such a controversial mystery surrounding his death.
Yeah.
And it's because he was a very significant figure in Nigeria's history. He is viewed in a very positive light by some Nigerians and viewed in a very negative light by others. Those who view him in a positive light love to speak of the progressive, quote unquote, progressive economic policies that he had. But then, as we will get into later on, he was also a very feared man. He caused great harm and distress and suffering to many Nigerians.
And as you were talking, I just remembered Chimamanda's The Danger of a Single Story. Because as you were saying, some people think, this and that about him and other. And it's just like, men are never really one-sided. Like, there's always going to be a good side to a person and there's going to be like bad sides to them. think of Mugabe, like everybody probably remembers him for some of the really negative impact and the negative stories they heard about him. But then I'm sure there are going to be many people who would have other things to say, because he did do some positive things, particularly at the early days of his political career. So similarly to Abacha, yes, he probably did make some economic it caused some economic progress to Nigeria's growth and did some other positive things. But then even with that one, you're thinking,
he sent it back.
Can you attribute all of that success to just him? Because, I mean, we're all employed and we're both employed, and you've had times when you've done work and your superior takes the credit for the work that you've done. So I'm sure the economic growth and all these positive things were not just achieved single-handedly. But obviously, as a leader, we acknowledge his leadership to the success of those things. But yeah, so you're right. You've pointed out quite a few things, and many people will have different things to say about Abacha. But going back to his death, part of the conspiracy that I read recently was that, so his death was announced on a Monday. They said he died on a Monday, but one of his close allies actually said he died on a Saturday, but the death wasn't announced until 2 days later. And I guess, if I don't think it's unthinkable to think that perhaps he was murdered. Like, it wasn't, so therefore I can I can conceive the idea in my mind that some people try to clean up their mess, or they try to think of what story they were going to tell people. And, if it was true that he was already in many people's bad books, they all had to align to make sure their story, they probably needed time to get those Indian ladies out of Nigeria.
Boy.
So yeah.
So what did Abacha do that would make him the enemy of so many?
What did he not do to make him?
That's probably the question.
I think that's the question. Because you know what, when he died, I remember I was less than 10. I don't know if it was 8 or, well, obviously 1998. I don't know. I was probably 9 or something. The news of his death, ignited so much joy and celebration. Almost the kind of joy you get when a new child is born into a family is the same kind of joy and rigor with which people celebrated the death of Abacha. And I remember, vividly, I think my mom was coming home from the market, and somewhere surrounding all of that was the news of Abacha died, and the drumming, the dancing in the streets, the singing, the clapping, the relief. Because even me at the time as a child, I understood when your parents are suffering, you're feeling the anger of the adults around you, you're feeling, they're coming today, they're saying, oh, this person died. There's a lot of mysterious death as well around that time,
that are associated with Abacha, Abacha, killing, political assassinations.
Activists and, significant people. There was letter bombs being sent to people. People were imprisoned. People were in exile. One of them was Professor Wole Soyinka. Obasanjo was imprisoned by Abacha. MKO Abiola. We're going to come to all of that later. People were sentenced to death. So, a lot of jobs were taken away from people because it literally dissolved many organizations, many civil organizations and stuff. So people really felt the impact, the economic and the social impact of Abacha's regime, was felt deeply by the grown-ups, and I guess that kind of filtered down through to the younger ones as well, because I think people of our generation who were in Nigeria at the time will probably kind of like tell you similar things. So I remember like we made up this like almost nursery rhyme kind of song, that was sang for many days. In remembrance of Abacha, in celebration of Abacha's death.
And that's it's really interesting to hear your story and what you remember of his death and the reaction to it, because as I said in the past podcast, that I was born and raised in the UK in London. So, we're both around a similar age. You're in Nigeria and Lagos.
No, not Lagos.
Okay.
No, do you know what? That's interesting you should say that, because we're going to come to another conversation about like how almost like Lagos is so much like the center of everything that is happening. But no, not in Lagos. I'm not going to expose myself on. I'm not going to expose myself.
Okay. But you were in Nigeria when Abacha died. I was here in UK in London, and I had no knowledge, no awareness of Abacha himself, no awareness or understanding of the impact of his death. And it's really cool, and it's to speak to you and hear you talk about that, because it puts into context for me how recent this stuff is. It's actually not that long ago, and I didn't know about it when I heard about Abacha. It was from like family members, and it was always around how people are still finding money that Abacha had stolen, and they were finding in many places across the globe.
Pockets.
I mean, you know when you watch those big Hollywood films and they're jumping from country to country. We're now here in Portugal, in Switzerland, in UK,
America.
America. It's like that's where you're finding.
It's the gift that keeps giving. That's what people have said. Like even from the grave, we're still recovering money, and I think it's very symbolic of the time of Abacha. So you were mentioning something before about how recent this is, and that's the thing, like Nigeria's democracy, because bearing in mind that Abacha was a dictator, he was a military ruler. So if you want to put like a very snazzy whatever, be like Nigeria's last dictator. So he was a dictator, was a very harsh regime. And I think we've only had about maybe 5 presidents since since Abacha's death, and even the first president, the first term of his leadership, it wasn't like he was voted in or anything like that. So we'll talk about that at some point in the future. But this money that we're finding in different places in all parts of the world, it pretty much characterizes the activities that were happening at the time of Abacha's regime, the corruption. Because that was the other thing when we were thinking, what word should we use for this man? And if I said corruption, I'm like, that could be anybody. Well, not anybody, but any kind of political leader in Nigeria at the moment. Because, hey, a huge percentage of them are corrupt. And I think they're all kind of like offsprings of Abacha in a sense. They're all kind of like, they emanated from the moment, the ashes, as it were. They emanated from the ashes of Abacha. And now...
Wow, true story are you telling?
And now they're bleeding us dry, in Nigeria. And the same attitude, the same mentality, the same, now you're finding money in empty buildings that nobody lives in. Many of them are building multiple houses. That doesn't make sense because you can only live in one, maybe 2. But let's say you want to live in one every day of the week, maybe 7. But many of them are having like ridiculous number. They're building wealth for... So this is the legacy of Abacha. And the strain, it's almost like his DNA is in every single
part of
modern day Nigeria. And this is why, again, it's, you know, this is why we're doing this podcast, because history is so important. We need to understand the legacy and why Nigeria is the way it is at the moment and what we're actually dealing with. And if we're gonna come out of this rut that we're in, what do we need to start to do? You know, because if you don't know where you're coming from, how are you gonna know where you're going? Yeah. So,
and something I want to pick apart a little bit as well is Abacha and his cronies were not behaving this way or engaging in this activity in a vacuum. I spoke of, the globe trotting that one has to do to find the money that was stolen, right? This money was being stored and kept in nations that are quote unquote democratic, the model of democratic success in the world. And yet they were housing the funds that were illicitly acquired, right? So the international powers were also complicit in the corruption, and it's really important to acknowledge and remember that the corruption that Abacha fathered
yes,
the corruption that he fathered,
the father of corruption,
the corruption that he fathered in Nigeria, he had brothers involved in that, like he had people that would, wink or turn away, turn their eye, because they would benefit also from the billions.
Yeah, and that's the hypocrisy of the Western world in a sense, because do you remember that time when, I think it was Buhari, or I think it might have been Buhari or Goodluck Jonathan, I can't remember, anyway, when one of the Nigerian presidents came to the UK for like a summit, and David Cameron was...
It was Buhari.
It was Buhari, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Was, quotes to have been saying about how Nigeria was fantastically corrupt or something.
Yes, Cameron said,
yeah.
The Nigeria is fantastically corrupt.
Yeah, and I thought, well, that's rich coming from you, because when I was doing my master's degree, I studied financial regulations and compliance, and one of the modules I studied was financial crime, and I mean, the lecturer was just... Nigeria was such an easy target to pick on. So almost every example had Nigeria in it. And, I'm not going to fight him for that. He had a point. But it's the fact that, but he also acknowledged the fact that this corruption, this movement of money across countries, across the ocean, it doesn't just happen without somebody turning a blind eye, like you said. And, America, UK, Switzerland, you name it, they've created an environment that is enabling for people to kind of just steal money from their country and come and deposit it, for them to steal money from their countries and come and buy houses, in your country without any explanation. And I think obviously they were trying to develop the laws, and you started having like this sanctioned list of like politically exposed people and all of this and all of that. But even still, I don't think they have enough incentive, because they have so much to gain, because your money is fueling their banks. Money is going here and there, they're investing it, they're making their own country better. Then maybe 10 years later, they might wake up and say, oh, you know what, let's return some of your money after you've already generated how much in interest and, whatnot. So it's just a very hypocritical system. But hey, that's just, we have ourselves to blame. In many ways, yeah, because I always say that you have to look in. I'm a very big advocate for looking within before you start looking without. You have to kind of assess yourself as a country. We often talk about corruption and the effects of colonization. what happened, what they did to us, how they're still controlling our leaders, blah, 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 blah. But actually, in reality, you think in the day-to-day governance, in how we treat each other, in the kind of infrastructure and systems that who's pulling the strings? Like,
that's interesting you say that. I think I come from it from an angle of not necessarily, I don't think it's necessary, for me, it's not necessarily a thing of, we must take sole responsibility. I think I am trying to view these events through the lens of people taking responsibility for what they did. And I'm not sure I'm quite at the stage of somebody being more responsible or not, because even the very existence of Nigeria, right, has been shaped by its former colonizer, right? And the existence of the country that has to be taken into consideration.
yeah.
And so for me, I suppose I don't think I'm necessarily disagreeing with you. I'm trying to look back at these activities and these events with a sober view. In that we need to acknowledge, and most Nigerians do acknowledge the failures of past and present political leaders, while also still maintaining the heat on the so-called external former or neo-colonizers, whether that be the nation state or other multinational corporations. I think it's about keeping a sober view.
Yeah, no, I hear you, and obviously it's a very kind of multifaceted conversation, isn't it? It's multifaceted in the sense that there's so many factors, there's so many players on the field, right? And you're right, because we can't. It's almost like what I was saying before. How do you move forward if you're not if you don't know where you're coming from, if you don't know the impact of this ridiculous amalgamation of Nigeria, what impact till today, the tribal wars and all of that stuff, what it means. So no, I totally acknowledge that significant impact and contribution of the Western world, and even till today what they're doing. And I guess for me, I'm just kind of like trying to think, well, going forward, having acknowledged all of this, knowing all of this, and it's almost like now we're wiser in a sense. To what extent do we, how do we move forward? And I think this is why what we're discussing is important, because I think you were saying before about if you keep the people in ignorance, my people perish for lack of knowledge. You were saying in the last episode, if we don't know even how Abacha's regime, how that impacts the Nigeria that we have today, because Buhari, let's not forget, is also an ex-military man.
Yeah.
And so that begs the question, how does an ex-military man take off his military cap and then puts on a democratic cap and say, oh, I was once a military ruler, now I'm going to be a democratic ruler,
So-called.
Yeah, and how am I going to make it work? And we're seeing the impact, the fact that it's not working. With all intentions and purposes, it's just not working. But we won't understand that. And for many young Nigerians, they're expressing their frustration, but oftentimes from a very kind of isolated place, because they're not really, some of us are not really connecting the dots. And I have to say that when Buhari became president, I was somewhat hopeful, in the sense that I heard about his kind of like, he was against corruption and this and that, and I was just really hopeful. But when you observe the way he's kind of engaged with Nigerians, it's very clear that you can't turn a leopard, or a leopard doesn't change its spots, or however they say it. It's just not possible. So yeah, and then also I was speaking of Obasanjo being imprisoned by Abacha, and when Abacha died, the fact that General Olusegun Obasanjo shows that he was once a military man himself. He came out of prison and they pretty much handed over the reins of the country to him. It wasn't there was no election, there was nothing. Obviously the second time he had to go through the electoral process. But again, it's all like, you see, when we say our democracy is really young, it's so young and so tender that we're still reeling from the effects of what happened with Abacha, whether we like it or not. All the things that have, and that's why even all the leaders that are running to today, they all have some connection with the time of the military rule. You know, you have Babangida, you have I forget their names now, and they're all trying to you have even Tinubu. You know, they're all trying to run for election again. They're trying to run for like really significant political positions. And you're like, if we're recycling all these old men from, you know, this very chaotic time in Nigeria's history, how are we going to move ahead as a nation?
Yeah, it's you make a really, really important point of, I really like what you said about like connecting the dots, because it's so true. I mean, when Buhari first came into power, it's so interesting that you say that you were somewhat hopeful, because I heard that as well, even being here in the UK, but because I have less exposure to what's actually happening on the ground, I was just viewing, to be honest, I was viewing him coming into power with a lot of cynicism. And I didn't understand why people were hopeful, because as far as I was concerned, there was still so much that I was viewing it from a point of cynicism, because corruption was such a normal thing, and it takes more than one hopeful campaign for a country like Nigeria, with all of its diversity and power grabs and I mean the issues just reel off, I suppose, or maybe not. But I was viewing it with cynicism, and unfortunately, I was right to.
Yeah.
I was right to view it with cynicism from being abroad.
Yeah.
You know, connecting those dots is really, really key, and we need to, and that's what I'm glad I'm doing this podcast, and I'm sure there are other people who are connecting the dots and are trying to push that to people. We need to remember what happened during Abacha's time, and think about the impact of some really key events on think about the impact of those events on today's on today's modern Nigeria. So I suppose that all leads to some of the things that we talk about in future episodes. So it would be good to hear from you, what are some of the key controversies or key events that really stick out in your mind, that come from Abacha's time, that you think have really serious, or have had a serious impact and legacy?
Yeah, that's a good question. So off the top of my head, when I think about Abacha, a few names come to mind. So Ken Saro-Wiwa, MKO Abiola, and Obasanjo, for different reasons. So Ken Saro-Wiwa was he was an activist. He was an environmental activist from Ogoniland in Delta, And essentially, Ogoni land, they discovered oil was discovered in this land. You had, as always, the exploit, because this was a time when, yes, oil was booming, and a lot of money was being made. A lot of Nigeria's wealth came from the exploitation of oil, and Shell company was in the Ogoni land, along with the other few oil companies, exploiting the land, polluting the land. They polluted the water pollution, air pollution, joblessness. People became sick. You can imagine all kinds of ailments and everything. And the people were just protesting and fighting for their basic human rights. Like, you can't come and take from us and give nothing in return. You were not really given jobs. We're getting sick. The hospitals are not being built. There's no there's no financial compensation, nothing. So Ken Saro-Wiwa was a leading figure in really protesting this brutality and crime, really is what it was, against Dutch and against the government as well, against Shell and against the government. So Ken and his group of people, they're popularly known as the Ogoni Nine, because there's 9 of them. Abacha sentenced them to death, and it all kind of, so some of the what was said to have happened was that some Ogoni leaders were killed, and Ken and his co-activists were implicated in the murder of those Ogoni leaders, and Ken claimed that he wasn't involved, and these people claimed that they weren't involved. But I guess there was a motivation to kind of silence Ken Saro-Wiwa, and this murder was a good opportunity to do so. So yeah, there was a lot of international outcry against the death sentence. Even Nelson Mandela was involved, trying to appeal to Abacha's better side and all that stuff, but he just did it anyway. So that is significant, and we're going to talk about why that is significant, because when we think about that region of Nigeria where oil was, or even still today, is generated and whatnot, the impact of that death, how the people were silenced, because here is what happened. A community look up to a leader, their spokesperson, as it were, and they watch him being killed alongside other people within the community. Essentially, you then take away their voice, because now they're thinking, wow, there's serious consequences for speaking. And it just kind of continues to enable this culture and this really...
The culture of fear.
Yeah, the culture of fear and the negativity surrounding it. So that is one. The other one is MKO Abiola, very popularly known figure. Again, I wrote about these two figures in my book, shameless plug, Nigerians of Interest. You can find it on Amazon. But I felt it was really important to write about these people, because I often think, oh, I know something, but I don't really know much. But then when I've engaged with other people, I'm like, oh, wow. Some of them don't know anything at all, or they know very little. I know a bit more than, and I thought these are people that should be known about, They were so significant. They were really important figures. They contributed something that should never be forgotten in our history. And it's important that it's documented, like we were saying in our first episode. So I wrote about them, and Abiola was, again, a figure of democracy in Nigeria, because after Nigeria was under a lot of, many years of military rule, I think it was the Ibrahim Babangida time, they said, okay, we're going to return back to a democratic rule. And there was this election, which is to today known to be the fairest, the truest, by international standard, election in Nigeria. And MKO Abiola was declared as the worthy winner of that election. So again, he went into this thinking, okay, they've promised us democracy, it's gonna happen, I've been declared winner, let me come and, start going, putting my whatever I said I was gonna do into action. And then before you know it, they halted the whole process. He was put in prison. Abacha, they put in an interim government, Ernest Shonekan. Abacha unseated him, he became ruler, right? Then comes in Obasanjo. Then what Abacha then started doing was he started imprisoning all these military people, because he did it because they were all kind of used to this like system of coups, like when they would, a coup would happen and they would unseat one ruler and another one would go. So he started to imprison all of them, well, a lot of them, to to kind of like declare his power and authority and whatnot. And Obasanjo was actually one of the rulers, and actually I think he sentenced Obasanjo to death, but international outcry, they appealed to him, and he was able to stop that from happening. And eventually after his death, Obasanjo being president might have even been a sacrificial atonement for the fact that MK Abiola could not be president, because MK Abiola was a Yoruba man, Obasanjo is also a Yoruba man. So there's a lot of, and how all of that is still till today having an impact. This is Abacha's legacy, things that he did, and I think it's important that we know about it, we're able to engage with it from an informed place, from a curious place, because there's going to be certain things that we will never know, but at least we can engage critically with this information and actually think, why did this thing happen? How can we prevent them from happening in the future? Because, the way Nigeria is today, anything can happen at any given time, as far as I'm concerned. We could be going back to a military regime next year. The way things are happening. So it's really critical. So I guess we'll delve a bit deeper into these things at some maybe next episode at some other time. But so I think we would like to know what our listeners think about Abacha. What's the misconceptions or their knowledge? What do they know? What do they think? Who was it to them? When did they first discover Abacha?
Was there anything redeeming about the man? Let us know.
Let us know. But this has been a good conversation.
No, it has.
Even though like our first recording wasn't, let's not talk about that. But not our first episode. We tried to record this episode before, but
So listeners, you had a quick run through of some of the key events and key events that shaped Abacha's regime and his legacy, and we're going to delve deeper into that in future episodes. So we will see you, or you will listen to us in those future episodes.
We will be in your earpods again very soon, but until then, make sure you follow us on all our social media platforms. Well, there's only two: Instagram and YouTube. And it's going to be available on wherever you get your podcast.
Yes.
You'll find us. So, and please do share, tell your friend, tell your neighbor, tell people.
Yes. So this is the Once Upon a Naija podcast. I'm Evelyn.
And I'm Lara.
See you soon.
Bye.